Dear everyone, welcome to our last panel of the final Deconfining Conference, African-European Cultural Cooperation, a conversation about future pathways, challenges, and valuable lessons. Hello also to everybody who is following us on the live stream. We're happy that you joined in. And I think this is kind of the final panel, so the idea is to wrap up a bit, but also to enter into a discussion with everybody right away, because I think we've been listening to many things during the last, like today and also yesterday, and I think it's really important to now also kind of look ahead and see what remains to be done, and that's something I think we can all do together. I will quickly present the panelists. So to my right is Vydia Tamby, cultural advisor of the mayor of Dakar and founding member of African Capitals of Culture. Vydia designs structural and cultural policies and fosters global to local networks. She's also an editor of Vydia and a member of Senegal's Fonds d'Archives, focusing on memory and narrative preservation through arts. On my left, we have Samba Yonga. She's a co-founder of the Women's History Museum of Zambia, and a communication specialist, cultural curator, and an award-winning journalist. She's also the founder and managing partner of Kuatenga Media, a company that provides communication specialist services across Africa. Samba has been recognized as one of the 100 most influential Africans by Quartz, New York, and one of the 40 most influential Africans. She has curated exhibitions, designed digital creative content, and written papers focused on indigenous African knowledge systems and narratives in Zambia and Africa. And to the left of Samba is Sylvia Amann, who's the director of InfoRelais, a cultural policy expert with more than 20 years shaping European CCI strategies and international cultural relations. She co-chaired the EU expert group on CCIs, contributed to urban innovative actions, and focuses on linking culture with climate, local global cooperation, and transformative policy making. So welcome to the three of you as well. Maybe just also to explain a bit how this conference fits into what we've been doing in Madrid over the last 4 years. So what we did is to organize kind of a small conference every year, kind of looking at the different confining patterns that are in place, and also to talk about how these specific confining patterns could be challenged or could be changed. So in 2023, we looked at territorial confinement and on strategies to deconfine, and exploring territoriality, exploring networks, and also multiple identities. In 24, we looked at social and environmental deconfinement, examining the specific areas of water and women, so looking at the environmental and the social challenges through the lenses of ritual, policy, and also practical experiences. Last year, we were looking at political deconfining, and we're focusing on international funding mechanisms and also on memory frameworks. So we talked a lot about the work on archives, on memory, and also how, kind of what impact international funding systems have on that. And so in a way, this is now also a moment to kind of bring together what we've been doing in these conferences, but also you'll see it's also a reflection on everything that has been done also in the work of the other partners. So that's why I think we have some input from here. But again, let's then kind of open up the discussion very quickly with all of you. So I will hand over first to Sylvia for the presentation of the R&E toolkit, and then later on we have Samba and Vydia kind of reacting also on the R&E toolkit with the intergovernmental governance model. So Sylvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Antonia. Hello again, good afternoon. I will be very short. I have 2 general statements and a few information, and then maybe also some outlook, and maybe with some key elements on the table. It's much easier for us this afternoon with almost 40 degrees to discuss and to go ahead, and maybe also easier for you, hopefully, to connect with us and so that we can talk to each other. So, general statement number 1, let me quickly make an escape from deconfining, because we are in Chemnitz. And Chemnitz was European Capital of Culture last year, and I want to express always my gratitude when I'm in Chemnitz. I was at chairing the selection panels for the European Capital of Culture, which then attributed the title to Chemnitz, and I'm very happy that this evolved so beautifully here in this city, and a lot of international exchanges could be intensified here. First general remark. Second general remark. Deconfining. I think, as this is the very last panel of a project which lasted officially 4 years, but which was something prepared for years before. And I remember very well this time, and there was one person who invented the title of this project, and he was never mentioned so far. At least I didn't hear his name. So I want to add my gratitude to Dorsi Rugamba from Rwanda, who said, okay, it was at the end of the pandemic, and there was a lot of talk about confinement and all these restrictions and all these disruptions, and he said for him, we need deconfining. Yeah, and he was the inventor of the title. I think we should be grateful to him too. Then I promised to make a few short inputs, so we could now present a whole toolkit and handbook and studies, etc. I explain quickly the process, why these papers were produced, and then maybe the main output or the main learnings out of it. So the deconfining project has a cultural policy work package. So there we concentrate on the more strategic things. And when we talk now about these papers, it's the strategic part of deconfining. Not the artistic and cultural exchange, it's what should be changed in the overall intercontinental ecosystem. And on our side, we have started with the first study at the very beginning of the project. This was an expert exchange, always on both continents, to understand in general where we are with this relationship and how is this relationship perceived. And already there we found, and I'm looking at you, that the local to local is something which is very much underexplored. And in that sense, we have also several partners in the deconfining project, not based in capital cities. So we have Christina over there from Salzkammergut 2024, also European Capital of Culture, and also Buda in the far north of Norway, also being a small city surrounded by rural territory. And so for them, it's also, of course, a crucial topic how to bring forward international cultural relations. The question is afterwards how, because the whole institutional context is completely different. And also the way how you are doing culture in these territories is or cultural development is very different from an urban center or from a metropole. Yeah. So in that sense, based on then a broad analysis of case studies from both continents, where we are with this cultural cooperation project, we had then the learning from the so-called ANI handbook. ANI means accessibility, reflection, networking, information, and empowerment. And we named it ANI not because I'm Austrian and I'm a fan of Schwarzenegger, who maybe somebody knows here in the room, but it makes us more easy to remember what are the important points. Accessibility, we have talked widely about one of these elements this morning. One accessibility element is mobility, but it's also about know-how, infrastructures, information, etc. There is huge accessibility challenges. Then reflection, it's not only about meeting, it's also about what do you do when you meet. It's also about this dialogue, etc. So how to connect and what are the topics you talk about. And there is a lot of natural connectivity between the continents. And to focus on that, yeah. Networking is clear. There needs to be an organization organizing that people can meet. We need platform. This can be informal or formal. Many options for that. Then information and knowledge system. I will not talk about that. We have our specialists close to me, and you know all these kind of concepts. And empowerment, I will be very short. We are all learners. And also in this context, or based on this concept, we have built all the work in the cultural policy work package, meaning all what I have presented, also, for example, the first study, and then also the ARNI handbook, was developed in a co-development process. Yeah, always with intercontinental meetings, always stakeholders from African side and from the European side around the digital table, and we continued like that. Last year we published then something which we named Building the Missing Link with Culture. And this is the final kind of big policy statement. And there, this was addressed mainly to the European Union and to the African Union, also in preparation of their summit. And there we said we need an integrated ecosystem, and that Europe and Africa and Europe could be the model region where an intercontinental, fully functional ecosystem of international cultural relations is built up. This will need 10 years. We have a draft action plan, what should be done. I will not detail that, but what is maybe important are 3 elements. So this ecosystem goes beyond funding. It's not only about funding, and if it's about funding, it's about co-financing and taking into account the situation on both continents. So on the European side, we have this tradition of public funding. On the African side, there's much more private initiative. So how can we find matching situations where this can be brought to another level? Then in order to achieve that, we need common governance. Our decision makers need to meet. Our decision makers need to meet regularly. So what we propose, I take only one example, that there is a regular intercontinental meeting of cultural ministers. This is one thing. And then we need structural support. We need, in that sense, not only temporary networks, we need a structure on which we can build all these activities. Yeah? So when we talk something which is maybe not so close here, but about the creative industries, for example, they need a single access point of access. Otherwise, it will be very, very difficult for a lot of people to access, for example, the European market, and also already some of the very interesting African markets, because this is also sometimes out of view. Yeah? So in that sense, these are the key points, and this is where we are. And I think in our paper, Building the Missing Links, our last phrase is join the movement, so come with us. On the African side, Keba Dafe from Segu in Mali is the contact person, and on the European side, it's me. So always happy to hear from you.
Go ahead, Samba.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you for the work that you've been doing. Actually, in the process of creating the model, we referenced a lot of your work, because as we went through the 4 years of doing collaborations, creating studies, analyzing the confining and deconfining patterns, what we also realized that there needed to be a reference model to be created, and it was actually one of the outputs of what is the way forward Now that we've tested models, we've worked as partners, we're looking at how cooperation can work better, what are the things that need to be done in order to improve this? So Vydia and I were tasked with creating a model, a governance model that will look at intercontinental cooperation in a fair way. So to map the process that we took, we had the gargantuan task of looking at all the reports that were created, analyzing all of the activities, production, and there were so many. Over 4 years, you can imagine the reports such as the one Sylvia has created and many others as well. And we found two things, the things that worked and things that didn't work. And just to say here, Vydia already said that she'll be the bad cop. So I'll be, so I'll be the good cop. Obviously, the things that worked were things like horizontal engagements, the nearness that the productions, partnerships, collaborations across countries, across projects that were engaged in. A lot of people felt safer, felt there were much more closeness, felt that there was some kind of equality in terms of how productions were done, how projects were executed, how decisions were being made, and that was a good result. I think across 20 institutions that were asked to answer questions about their experience, most of them expressed this positive. And of course, there's the bad side. A lot of them we've heard already, the visa violence, the deficit in funding, the unequal decision-making. All of these are patterns that are not unique, to international cooperation. It happens a lot, especially North-South cooperation. So looking at a horizontal engagement, so that was a takeaway of how this could work better. So one of the solutions that we came up with was looking at a sovereign partnership model that has 3 gears. And obviously this is not set in stone, and I think that's why Antonia opened with saying that we'll continue this conversation as a group to understand what could be improved, what have we left out, what else could work better. But we wanted to focus on the 3 areas that we noticed came up over and over again, and obviously one of them, as discussed, was repeated over and over again: mobility justice. How do we get mobility justice for partnerships between the North and South? The second thing was resource sovereignty. Funding deficits is a problem. Project-to-project funding is also a problem for African partners, because then that means they only rely on the funding that's there, but they can't generate funding to continue and to be sustainable. The third one was the cycle of return. How do we ensure that we're continuing a cycle of knowledge production and building ecosystems where we're learning from each other rather than an extractive process? We're building institutions that could continue and allow for a continuation of production, which will then bleed into continuity and sustainability. So with mobility justice, obviously, yesterday was interesting because we sat on the artist visa and there was a vision around what an artist visa could look like. There was huge debate about what can work and what cannot. But I think what was agreed is that there's a need to share risk between the partners in the North and the partners in the South, to ensure that even as there is a process of going to access a visa, there is a support system. There is enough time to prepare in order to get the visa. There is also sufficient funding allowed for both the institution that's inviting and the institution that is going to come to the continent. And then I think the third one was also looking at how do we work with African institutions to ensure that they are also supporting the process. Do we build a database of what artists are? But then the discussion was that, well, that might be discriminatory because Some institutions can be selective about who is an artist and who is not, and that can be a gatekeeping process as well. But then there was a discussion around private funding. How do we involve private funders on the continent to be a part of this? This works really well on the continent, but as I understood, for Europe, it might, because they're used to public funding, working with private funders might be a problem. But still, there's an opportunity there. If we can mobilize private funders on the continent, how would it work best strategically to bring those two forces together? Because in Africa, the government is more a strategic partner. They'll stamp, they'll give you an endorsement, but they won't give you money. But there is money on the continent. So how do we use this partnership to leverage and access that money? So those are some of the things that we look at as well in the governance model. And then looking at co-investment as well. We have billionaires on the continent, and they want to support projects. And a great case study of that is the ArtX project. I don't know if some of you know it. It's become now one of the premier international destinations for art collection and art market. 10 years ago, when Tokini started it, it seemed like a dream. And now everyone from Sotheby's to whoever you can think of attends, and they buy art in the millions. So what are we doing with this leverage that we have? Because I think as a deconfining partnership, we have very strong leverage. The partners that we have, the public funders from Europe, the strategic partners, how can we come together and meet on the continent and ensure that we're looking in the right places to provide access and sustainability for our artists? And that also, I think, in a way, provides a level of equality. Because the truth is, if money comes from one place, that's where the decisions will be made as well. It's very hard to provide equal decision-making if only one side is making money. And so this financial sovereignty will allow for an equal platform to make decisions and to execute as well. I think I'll allow Vydia to be the bad cop now with some... Yeah, no, these are the gears, yeah. You can... I finish with the cycle of return? Okay, I feel like I'll finish everything. And then... Exactly, no. I want you to be the bad cop, yeah. And then there's the cycle of return. We alluded already to how do you build institutions and ecosystems that will be sustainable. The truth is there's always the assumption that the knowledge is only traveling in one direction, but there is knowledge in the other direction as well. And there's two things that happen. The knowledge that is coming from the other direction, and normally it's the relationships in the South, there's a feeling that there's probably no space or positioning to share that knowledge, or the knowledge is not relevant in those spaces. So the thing to do is allow the room and space for that knowledge exchange. Indigenous knowledge systems, how do we decolonize the ways of thinking, the ways of understanding, the ways of expressing ourselves, and therefore producing knowledge. So the cycle of return looks at examining all of that. And these three gears together work to form a consistent way of inching towards some kind of change. It's not going to be immediate change, but it has to be collective, collaborative change towards something meaningful and sustainable. Bad cop.
Merci Samba. J'ai préféré effectivement laisser Samba bien expliquer tout en anglais parce que déjà je vais m'exprimer en français. Je pense que tout le monde est largement plus anglophone. Et j'aimerais remercier tout le monde ici, Sylvia pour ce travail autour de l'Arni Toolkit qui nous a été très très précieux pour réfléchir à ça, le Goethe-Institut, l'ITI, Sarah avec qui nous avons collaboré pour designer ce document. Peut-être juste pour ajouter quelques mots sans être très longue, c'est que d'un point de vue africain, puisque nous devons aussi parler de ce point de vue-là, et c'est ce que nous avons essayé de faire avec Samba, nous avons déjà constaté qu'il y avait une approche différente de la notion même de culture sur nos deux continents. les textes fondateurs de l'Union européenne et ceux de l'Union africaine ne disent pas les mêmes choses quant aux intentions de la culture sur les deux continents. L'aspiration 5 de la charte de la Renaissance culturelle africaine exprime très clairement les ambitions de la culture pour le continent et qui sont véritablement intégrées dans une vocation sociale d'abord et intégrées dans un développement très humain. Donc effectivement déjà dans la collaboration et la rencontre entre l'Europe et l'Afrique sur ces deux visions différentes, il y a déjà un petit décalage sur lequel nous devons travailler. La deuxième petite chose sur laquelle je voudrais insister, c'est la disparité de nos territoires. L'Europe est très diverse, l'Afrique l'est peut-être encore plus. Lorsque nous échangeons avec Samba, nous nous rendons compte que nous avons des réalités extrêmement différentes et la discussion entre nos territoires, nos réalités, nos ambitions sont aussi une nécessité. J'entends beaucoup parler d'industrie culturelle. Par exemple, au Sénégal, les industries, nous ne sommes jamais passés par la phase d'industrialisation. Donc, à mon sens, c'est une erreur de parler d'industrie culturelle, en tout cas pour le territoire que je connais le mieux. Et cette approche des industries créatives, telles qu'elles sont proposées aussi par les programmes européens et la vision européenne, et dans lequel, parfois, dans ces relations intercontinentales, nous devons échanger, les terminologies et les termes employés sont extrêmement importants, il me semble. Je suis éditrice de métier et je pense que c'est très important de dire les choses. C'est pour ça que peut-être parfois je suis, entre guillemets, le mauvais flic, mais je pense que c'est très important de dire les choses parce que parfois il y a des glissements sur aussi les analyses et c'est très facile de glisser, de glisser sur certaines choses. Donc déjà, la première chose que je pense être une réalité, c'est qu'il faut appréhender les territoires. Ce n'est pas les pays, ce n'est pas vraiment la spécificité des territoires. Et c'est là où je rejoins beaucoup Sylvia. Je suis aussi convaincue que c'est au niveau décentralisé et local que tout ça doit se jouer. Avec effectivement ce slogan qu'on entend souvent, penser global, agir local, mais c'est véritablement comment mettre en réseau des écosystèmes. Nous avons aussi beaucoup parlé d'écosystèmes. Qu'est-ce que veut dire le terme même écosystème sur nos territoires africains? Est-ce qu'il rencontre la vision européenne? Ça, c'est aussi une question. Donc, questionner cette mise en réseau des écosystèmes, et nous voyons, et c'est ce que nous avons bien appris lors de ce projet, c'est que, en tout cas, les relations humaines et quand les écosystèmes sont connectés, ça fonctionne. Et que nous arrivons à promouvoir des choses extrêmement intéressantes sur différents niveaux. Pour les territoires, parce que d'abord, moi, effectivement, j'ai cette expérience d'une ville et comment la culture peut agir directement sur la ville, son dessin, ses ambitions, la vie de ces peuples et le développement de ces territoires, vraiment pour le bénéfice des peuples d'abord. Et c'est ça qui va nous intéresser, c'est ça qui, moi, va m'intéresser d'abord. Mais au-delà de ça, effectivement, que tout ce que ça peut véhiculer par ailleurs. Je représente aussi ici, effectivement, le programme des capitales africaines de la culture, qui est une vision pendante. Nous avons réfléchi aussi en rapport avec les capitales européennes de la culture, en changeant tout de même l'approche, puisque pour nous, il n'était pas en question de mettre nos territoires en compétition, mais plutôt de réfléchir ensemble et de recevoir, en fait, les cultures africaines sur une ville, travailler sur les filières. C'est quelque chose que nous n'avons pas non plus beaucoup évoqué tout à l'heure. Cette approche, parfois projet, que nous avons dans les relations intercontinentales ne permet pas la durabilité. Et que ce soit dans le financement, que ce soit dans les hommes, et nous le voyons bien là avec DECONFINING, on a tous envie de continuer, mais comment? Et l'approche projet a son propre son propre pendant assez négatif. Donc nous essayons d'avoir aussi cette approche beaucoup plus durable et sur le long terme. Nous considérons et nous espérons que ça puisse aller dans ce sens. Et nous pensons aussi que c'est essentiel. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much to the three of My micro is on again. Thanks a lot. And I think, Sylvia, you want to react right away. Let me just also throw in one other aspect, which I think is important when talking about governance and indeed about where the money comes from, where decisions are being taken. And Sylvia, you were mentioning also the preparation of this project and all the thinking that was there. And I do remember also a lot of talks in Brussels with people from the Commission thinking about where do we put this project? Where can we apply? Where are the funds that actually allow for an equal African-European cultural project? And there was, we tried many things, you tried many things, but I think the answer in the end was Creative Europe, which in a way was already limiting because the partners that are accepted within the Creative Europe program are European organizations. And so there is a whole, reflection and work about how to involve African partners. But in the way it was constructed, already there is inequality. And so it's very difficult when you start from that to then, kind of get somewhere else. And again, I think this is kind of the one also actor missing in our conference is somebody from the EU, because again, kind of coming back to what we said yesterday, this was possible 5 years ago. It would probably not be possible to present a project like that, or it will be a lot more complicated to get funding if we would present it today. And so where's the future, also of these international cultural relations? Where will it be kind of also kind of practically, where is there money available or not? But that's just also some...
Antonia, now you have thrown an additional 10 points to the discussion. This will be very difficult. I just want to quickly to answer to one or two elements which I observed in the statement of Vydia. I think what is still also in the perception from outside Europe is that Europe is unified, and it strongly emphasizes that aspect in the whole communication because it's part of the geopolitical agenda. So in that sense, people from outside have often the impression this is Europe. And when I speak with people from Western Africa, they think France is Europe. And I explain all the time because I'm Austrian. No, you are referring to France. In my country, it's completely different. It's the opposite. It's not organized like that. It does not work like that. This is not our priority, etc. And I think this is also something when you talk, Vydia, I agree with you that we need to be careful with the words. And also, I think towards Europe, we need to understand this huge diversity, and especially when we talk about territories. So this Chemnitz area is completely different from Barcelona. It's completely different from Lund. It's completely different from Rovaniemi. It's completely different from Salzkammergut, etc., etc. We have also, you mentioned the huge diversity, but in our discourses, we tend to unify Europe, and I think we have to be careful with that too. I forgot the second point I wanted to answer because Antonia made then this long list related to the funding programs. Okay. So this brings us back to the preparation phase of deconfining and why deconfining was possible. Deconfining was possible because there were very few people just crazy about the idea that these two continents need to connect more and that culture and arts have to play a role. And when I think back to my related work in order to prepare this whole process, it started 10 years ago. It started in my work in the selection panel of European Capitals of Culture, and I was completely disappointed that Africa played no role in this major European initiative. Sometimes we had artists from the US, a few from Japan, but no Africans. And I started to question that, and nobody even had asked the question before, and this I found even more problematic. So just to see on which level of discussion we are. Okay, this was 10 years ago. Then Antonia mentioned the whole process with the European institutions. So you can already forget to finance a project like that on national level. They will tell you this is not our priority country, this is not our priority partner, etc. You will not finance. So already you need a supranational funding source in order to go ahead with such a project. So the only one which remained, or almost only one, there would have been maybe one or two other options, was the European level. But they had no dedicated funding program for this type of action. So at the very end, it's a long story, I will make it again very short, we ended up with Creative Europe. And of course, Creative Europe is a project to fund cooperation inside Europe. And they have a small window on international cooperation. And this small window on international cooperation, we opened it to the extreme. But now we are having the next negotiation round, and I don't know how familiar all of you are with the different European institutions. We have Parliament, which is elected. We have the Commission, who takes care of the contract. And then we have the member states. And for the moment, we have a situation that for the next funding period, the European Commission has proposed to close that small window, international cooperation. And then is the question where to get the money from in order to go ahead with projects like that. So, of course, Antonia would even say I'm a kind of completely crazy optimist. It's always her comment. We know each other for a very long time. I'm always optimistic that we will find something and that we find solutions and that we can go ahead. But also what I said in our round about the mobility, the geopolitical context is not at all in favor for the moment. And in order to go ahead, we need to build alliances. You go nowhere without alliances in policy making. And then you have to find at least a few political parties starting to support this. For the moment, we have no single European political party aiming to have more international cultural cooperation effectively. So they talk about cooperation in nice talks, but in their programs and to fight for it, I would not find one single one. Yeah? So in that sense, we are in a kind of difficult situation everywhere. I always say also Europe is joining now the globe because we were somehow the exception. And also we discussed already yesterday with Samba, we have to build these strategic alliances. We have also to bring in the private sector. And already yesterday I said, the Europeans can learn a lot from the African continents in order to work with the private sector. And this would already build an element where we could have a much better relationship. Yeah? Two knowledge providers.
Yes. Yes. I just want to agree with that as well, but also to challenge ourselves, particularly on the continent. I think we always assume that a suggestion coming from the continent might not work, or there might be a problematic issue with trying to get it that way. You've already presented for Parliament and the EU what the conditionalities are. I think we have to be honest and courageous and ask ourselves the question, if we're going to continue international cooperation, particularly with Africa, what would it look like to exclude going through the process with the EU and just continuing with the cooperation? What are the alternatives and options available? We've talked about private investment, co-investment on the continent. There's definitely a lot of funds on the continent that do support these kind of funds. I've given a case study of ArtX. There is also a fund that donated $25 million to an African institution. And that's just one. an African institution. I won't mention who the fund is, but it's well known. It's not private or anything. So there is possibility, but we have to think of what is strategically attractive for African investment to invest in a project like this. That's what we have to start thinking about. Because I think it's usually we look the other way around. Oh, we need to provide support for Africa. We need to help, but we're not looking. We're not looking at. It's. I think it's. Breaking the system. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Because I don't think we've thought of it in that way, because I imagine walking to a boardroom or a meeting and saying to strategic partners, what can be on offer? How can we, what is attractive for you in order to invest money? Because these things are not unreal, they are real. People are investing millions in projects. How can we access those millions? And we have very strong leverage as a collective, combined strength. We go into these rooms and ask for these partnerships. There is a solution, I do believe that.
Please feel free to step in really into the discussion, because again, I think they have been presenting a bit what they have been harvesting, but again, it's kind of it's what we're all working on, and so please really feel free to step in at any point. I would like to come back a bit to Vydia. You were. Je parle en français? Oui. Ouais, bon. So you were mentioning the different notions of culture, kind of coming back to the words, you know, to the terms that we use, to the CCI logic, which is difficult to maybe kind of to just send or like translate or something to the African context. And indeed, I would like to also kind of echo a bit what Sylvia was saying, that of course, even in the European context, I think the logic doesn't always work well. And even in Europe, I think there are very different notions of culture, at least the way they are kind of written into, I don't know, legislations or constitutions or whatever. So again, I really think we, like, Europe has to learn a lot and could learn a lot, and especially in this moment where everything is so precarious, and I think we're really fighting to have cultural funding in general, because it's being cut, especially on the national and the local level. It's crazy, but also on a European level. So it's not at all like a given fact or something. So in a way, I think, yeah, that's it. I think kind of joining forces on many levels would be very beneficial and could really also take us somewhere else, I think.
Oui, merci beaucoup Antonia. Je pense en effet que le terme même de culture, effectivement, en fonction des réalités, en fonction des espaces, en fonction des histoires, revêt différentes choses. Mais je pense qu'il y a quelque chose sur lequel nous nous entendrons tous, c'est que nous vivons actuellement dans un monde capitaliste. Je pense que c'est la base. C'est pourquoi la notion de valeur et économique de ce que peut produire la culture est aujourd'hui appréhendée de cette manière-là. Nous parlons beaucoup de valeurs immatérielles dans la culture, et c'est pour ça que nous faisons valoir, et particulièrement peut-être sur nos territoires où en fait la culture est réellement intégrée dans les pratiques sociétales et pour des objectifs autres qu'économiques. On fait voyager des objets pour des liens entre personnes, mais la finalité n'est pas au départ forcément économique. Et c'est peut-être là où il y a un petit peu cet enjeu. La deuxième chose sur laquelle peut-être je voudrais insister, c'est la notion d'approche filière. C'est-à-dire ce sur quoi nous travaillons, nous, c'est se dire que l'artiste ou la production artistique n'est jamais là toute seule. Il y a une filière qui est mise en place, et l'artiste n'est pas seul. Moi, je suis éditrice, par exemple, je ne suis pas artiste, mais je considère que je fais partie du maillon essentiel qui va permettre l'émergence d'une œuvre. Et dans une production, par exemple dans l'édition, vous avez un nombre d'acteurs sur la filière qui sont essentiels et qui doivent être soutenus de manière structurelle à tous les échelons, et pas que l'artiste. Ça, c'est aussi, à mon avis, la deuxième chose. Quand on parle d'écosystème, il y a l'écosystème environnemental, il y a l'écosystème peut-être géographique, social, etc. Mais il y a l'écosystème, effectivement, de la filière et comment l'appréhender de cette manière-là. Il y a l'autre chose, effectivement, quand on joint nos forces, c'est aussi savoir comment, sur nos territoires, on arrive à implémenter des lois, parce que je pense aussi c'est ça, qui permettent l'émergence et la protection de nos, entre guillemets, de nos industries culturelles. Comme on l'a vu, par exemple, en Belgique, à un moment donné, on a fermé les portes pour que les livres ne soient plus importés, on a promu la production nationale, et c'est comme ça que la filière s'est développée. Je prends encore ces exemples économiques qui sont pour moi importants, c'est-à-dire ces plaidoyers communs que nous devons faire aussi, et c'est ça qui est peut-être aussi compliqué, les disparités et les différentes réalités même de gouvernance dans nos pays sont tout à fait différentes. La force d'un parlement ou d'une assemblée nationale dans un pays n'est pas forcément la même ailleurs. Mais comment détaxer les intrants par rapport à nos productions, comment faire en sorte, etc., etc. Il y a un nombre de questions infinies que nous pouvons porter, mais que nous devons regarder un petit peu en face. La logique régionale dont parlait Samba et qui pour moi aussi est essentielle, comment créer ces institutions régionales sur notre continent qui permettent de donner un peu caution à ces combats que nous portons pour les filières artistiques et culturelles. Et sur lesquelles nous nous référencerons aussi, puisque c'est aussi les mêmes problématiques, je pense, que l'Europe a connues pendant et qui continue de connaître.
Maybe to add on some of the concepts, Vydia, you have just mentioned. It's the second time that you mentioned the cultural and creative industries, and I think this topic has several dimensions. I was in the EU expert group for the cultural and creative industries for around 7 years, and I had the chance to lead then the group on innovation and entrepreneurship the last 2 years that this group existed. And at the very end of this process, we made the first ever vision statement of such an expert group, and we highlighted at that moment already the huge importance of these sectors also for social and environmental development. And but what we never did, and I still support very much that idea we had many years ago, we were never precise what we mean with the cultural and creative industries, because we use it also as a concept for political discourse. Because this topic opens doors which are normally closed. And Samba has already talked about the boards of some important companies, or to open the doors to investors, etc. So as long as you are remaining somewhere in a gray zone, it opens much more political opportunities. It opens doors which normally remain closed. And I think this is important, and also in a global perspective, because when we see the big discussions around G20, when we see all what the UN has published related to cultural policy, this concept is introduced with policymakers. We should not throw it away. It's good to have then or related debates, but on a political level, I would not throw it away. And then in addition, when we did our last study for the European Parliament, so on the cultural policy orientations for the current mandate, we did in our policy recommendations splitting the recommendation part. And one was the role more or less culture and the arts and also creative industries can play in order to help societies to transform. This is one side. And the other side is more something what we would name in other sectors a chamber of commerce or the trade union, where we try to negotiate the improvements for the different sectors, and where we try to have a fundamental change there. This is also about IP rules and regulations, but afterwards, I'm an entrepreneur for 26 years. The most tricky thing is IPR enforcement. You know that it's your IP, but you have to go for a lawyer and you have to struggle for it. And this is a long and costly process. And most of the people in the sector cannot afford for going for that. Yeah? The law is only the first step, but the other thing is to enforce, and this is the crucial one.
Okay.
Sylvia, I want to thank you for that, what you've offered here in terms of why the term creative industries is useful and where it's useful, because I've been struggling with it, because South Africa and a lot of, at the time there was an organization called Arterial Network. We took on the word creative industries. It shows up in South African policy and the white paper that nobody's ever actually ratified. And it's there, but the reality is different. So I've been struggling with whether or not we were right in going that direction, because in saying creative industries, the government is forever talking about when they want to abscond their responsibility to funding culture for the sake of culture, then they talk about cultural entrepreneurship and the need for sustainability without considering all the nuances that determine whether or not this myth or aspiration of sustainability is possible given the context, right? And so I like what you have to say when you say creative industries is useful in opening up some conversations and opening up some doors. It kind of alleviates this thing that I've been grappling with, to go, did we need to go there? And what have we lost when we replaced culture work or whatever other term that we had going when we went the route of industrialization? So thank you for that. It's giving me a lot more to play with in my head as I kind of figure this out. And I don't know if I heard you correctly, but that's what's going on in my head right now. And so, for example, in South Africa, one of the key objectives of arts and culture department is to foster something about fostering social cohesion. So I don't know what, like, how do you measure that? Like, how do we measure that people are cohesive? Is it that they are agreeing on everything, which is why you'll find a situation where the Minister of Culture in South Africa is censoring an artist's voice in the Biennale because they don't agree with the ideology. And they one of the critiques that they made to why they censored the artist was that the work was divisive. And I'm like, oh, are we not doing culture to foster multiple voices? So there's this identity crisis that I've been struggling to make sense of when it comes to creative industries. What do we gain? What have we lost? And I think your offers me something more to think about and work through in my head. And the IP conversation, I don't know, like on the continent, like a long time ago, there were conversations around IP and what it means, what IP means as a Western concept, but what is the idea of IP in the commons? So for example, with your work, Samba, that you're doing in the museum, like what is IP there when this knowledge is knowledge that is available to all the makazis, the matriarchs? Like how do you negotiate IP there? A lot to think about, oh my God.
There is a lot to think about, but I think the key thing to realize or to notice, speaking to your conversation around the creative industries, what is happening now on the continent? Just think about the creative industries on the continent as a whole. There's never been a time like now that the creative industries has gone up. It's one of the top 10 performing industries on the continent. Just think of the music, think of the fashion, and the world is converging around Africa. So the IP thing is an important thing because we've seen numerous reports, conversations, protests about appropriation of African cultural artifacts, cultural IP, and that is an issue. Some countries, some territories are doing the work to protect it, but the truth is there's a lot of cultural IP that you can't really protect because it's in the public domain and everybody can use it. And what is being encouraged is to create products that will then lock the IP. So for example, our government just signed off on a law that if you use cultural IP to create another product, nobody can use that. Then you can sue and you can get money for it. And that's what needs to be encouraged, and that's part of understanding what needs to be done in the creative industries in order to generate income. So imagine if an ecosystem works in a way that that's part of the process of development as well. Not only are you protecting IP, but you're creating and contributing to the economy as well at a time when African creative industry is at the most popular. If you think about all these companies that independently have gone into Africa to invest, whether you think of motion picture, or you think of music, there's no law that made them go there and do it. They saw the opportunity and went and invested. And they're making money from that. So I think the conversation is around how do we equip Africans to position themselves to be able to make those kind of decisions of ownership and to be part of the conversation as well. Those are very, very key things. And that's where, when talking with European parliamentarians and key stakeholders, those are the things that can make actual changes, right? So that there's equality when somebody comes to invest on the continent and there's wider distribution of knowledge around what to do. Yeah. Yeah?
Maybe to quickly add on that, also in the paper, Building the Missing Links, we propose a kind of IP clearinghouse access point, because this brings me to another level. It's very difficult also in Europe for many in the art and creative sectors to understand what does the laws protect and how is it protected and what does this mean for their practical work. So in another strategic project we made for the European Commission, it's called Creative Flip. There we have a so-called IP tool, but this works only for Europe. But to enlarge things like that intercontinentally and also to have a number to call. I have this specific case and can you help me, what should I do? And how do I enforce that also then, for example, when I'm a creative from Zambia and I have some doubts if my work is treated legally correct on the European continent, because this is specialized knowledge. Normally you pay a lot of money for that, but this would be exactly these ecosystemic support actions which could help that this whole relationship could work better. Yeah. And to, yes, this is the element of fair payment, I say.
Yeah, well, yeah, no. But when we're saying make money, no, absolutely, I agree. I'm being the bad cop now. But the truth is, for me, it doesn't make sense that there is money being generated with African cultural capital, but none of it's, a large majority, not none, there's a lot of Africans making money out of their culture, but there's a large majority of the Africans who don't know how to apply that in order for them to generate income, even within the communities of origin themselves. And this could contributes to national development and developing infrastructure, developing education systems, developing access to healthcare. All this could come from this ecosystem. And that's what we mean when we're saying making money.
Hello, everybody, and thank you. This is a really interesting conversation. For me, all of this makes sense, but then I often feel like we're also allowing ourselves to be, to do that self-colonization kind of thing. You know, when we talk about where does the knowledge belong to, and this idea of kind of being, for me, and I could be wrong, and I'm probably wrong, but for me, how I've always perceived it is that the kind of ecosystem and the living in Africa, its abundance is in the collective, right? And so when we start to put things, and there's a reason for it, like to make things legal so that you can protect yourself, but sometimes that legalizing then starts to create these kind of individualized and very self-navel-gazing kind of, I must protect me, and therefore I don't care for the greater majority. And I'm wondering, with all of your wonderful knowledge, and I'm not a capitalist, although I understand that I have to live in a capitalist system and I require food and all that kind of stuff that I possibly can't grow myself, or whatever the case is there other ways of thinking about how we protect collectively rather than individually, so that we don't fall into what I believe are the trappings of what is now showing a breaking system, you know, of the world, where everybody is thinking about themselves, which allows this polarization where nobody cares for each other anymore. I don't know if my question makes sense, but we reproduce the harm, we become the harm, but I also understand that our continent has suffered so much because we haven't had the legal frameworks in place, or do you know what I mean? So I don't know if there's maybe an imagination of something like this.
Merci beaucoup pour cette question. Non, c'est une question tout à fait pertinente et intéressante. Et je crois qu'il y a beaucoup, en tout cas de ce que moi j'entends de mon côté, il y a beaucoup d'initiatives et de réflexions qui sont faites en ce sens. Je parlais récemment avec Cheikh Diallo, qui a été longtemps le président de l'Association des designers africains. Et justement, il m'expliquait très clairement que la notion même de savoir ou de pratique située en Afrique était très complexe à identifier, puisque les trajectoires ne sont pas linéaires des savoirs, et ils voyagent. Donc ils sont passés par différents peuples, par différents espaces, par différentes pratiques, et on ne peut pas aujourd'hui forcément identifier ce type de tressage avec lequel est fait mon sac. C'est sénégalais, ou ce n'est pas indien, ou peut-être même indien, ou peut-être sud-africain. Le tressage est pratiqué partout. Comment il a voyagé, de quelle manière ce tressage aujourd'hui peut être déposé par une structure, par un individu ou par n'importe qui, ça paraît extrêmement compliqué. Mais en tout cas, il y a effectivement cette réflexion qui est en cours par de nombreux créateurs, et les créateurs eux-mêmes se revendiquent d'être, surtout les designers, ils disent nous on travaille la notion de designer et d'artisan par exemple, qui est beaucoup travaillé sur notre continent. Où est la limite? Qu'est-ce qui fait l'artiste? Qu'est-ce qui fait etc. Comment on arrive, et encore une fois, à cette notion collective, de filière, de groupe, d'espace partagé, de communication, comment elle peut être réfléchie ensemble et poser aussi des bases légales qui permettent de protéger nos savoirs africains, peut-être d'une certaine manière, mais identifiés sur un territoire ou pour une ethnie ou pour un individu paraît parfois extrêmement compliqué.
Samba?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I think it is, as I'm sure Vydia is saying as well, it is a very complicated situation, and I think this is where we need to innovate. Because remember, the tendency as well is to apply laws and frameworks that might not work in our context. So the challenge is also to rethink that, you know, just the way we had the exercise of doing that within this project is to rethink what that might look like. Because the truth is, I don't think we can get away from the fact that this might continue happening. the appropriation will continue happening without the law. But we still do want to maintain the idea of a collective community, collective ownership, collective sustainability, and collective income generation. What does that look like? I think we just have to ask the question. I think particularly for the law that was created in Zambia, there are certain kinds of collective artifacts and ownership of culture that you can't appropriate. For example, if it's known that a particular song is sung by the Bemba in the north and they wear this kind of bark cloth and they've sung it for years, and you can't appropriate that. It's against the law. You would have to ask for permission. You would then have to pay royalties to the community for you to be able to use it. So it could look different in different spaces, but I think it's about innovating what we mean and how we design and what we identify as collective cultural material. Because remember, that's also a big issue. A lot of our cultural material is everywhere around the world, and also within our communities, a lot of it has been lost or misidentified. So there's a bit of work there to be done as well to identify. And remember, we also have the advent of AI. And AI at the moment, there was a report that just came out that because all AI does is rake all the information, put it in there, regurgitate it. But in Africa, there's a lot of information that's still in archives, that's still in oral archives, as in it's in the people, and it's still in places that AI can't access unless it's put in there by somebody. And at the moment, as we speak, there are projects that are funding African scholars, African creatives, African technologists to find that information and put it in AI. So very soon there will come a time where we have no control on what we can protect and can't protect. So we have to think about what we can do now to mitigate that. It's about traceability. I should be able to see the pattern there and say that comes from wherever. I see that now. I don't know where it comes from, you know, but it looks like it's African, but I don't know where it comes from. But we should be able to get to the point, and that's a level of knowledge production, that's a level of understanding and learning, to be like, that is from Zambia, that is from Ghana, that is from, and so that even if somebody takes it, there's still a level of traceability and ownership. But yeah, otherwise, I think everything is going the other direction.
I think we are going into deep discussions now on all kind of levels, but I will add some elements and maybe also some elements of what is going on in other countries, on other continents, and in the international sphere. So I think there are two international discussions for the moment. One is really this IP issue, and this, I think, in the cultural context is mainly meant, one thing is to allow fair payment, and to prevent stealing. And these links again also to AI and also to all these kind of things. Big companies are stealing the patterns from different countries, and they do high-end fashion, and they sell the dress for 20,000 euros, and the original community gets nothing out of it. And so these things need to be clarified. So so this is the whole IP thing. And then on the other side is the restitution thing, which links also to that one. And one of the most advanced governments in that sense is the Mexican government. They do not speak about restitution, they speak about rematriation. And I think this is an interesting concept for the whole Global South, because they are also very much advanced in the legal procedures. They got a lot of artifacts back. They got a lot of, they won a lot of legal procedures, etc. So this could be an interesting thing. And then on the UN level again, and also at the last Mondial Cult, we had this discussion about the global public goods. And this links again to that we do not want to put everything into a kind of economic logic and in the legal logic, but that we are having World Heritage is also the old concept, but now to say a common public good. The problem is with this discussion on the public good that it goes very far, because I've heard also, and this would be neo-colonial to my point of view, some people in speeches saying a whole African continent is global public good. And this means, again, all the resources and all what is there is to us all. And this continues the pattern we had in old times, yeah, and still have. So in that sense, I think it's a passionate debate. It's really going on all levels. And I think it's really important that a lot of African voices are heard, much more related to that. But I have also certain hope that Europe could be a strategic partner in that, because I do not see too much the US or China being a partner in that, also from the kind of cultural approach to these topics. So in that sense, that could be something where we could bring some issues forward also on the global scene. And this brings me to the very last word. I think there is also a crucial role of intermediaries, because we talk about very complex things. And then at the very end, we are sitting all in our villages and try to move the world into a better direction. But this is very complex. It works a little bit, but we will not solve it. It needs the decision makers too. And there comes again what I say, intermediaries. We need umbrella organizations. We need like the National Cultural Institutes. We need friends in the ministry, etc., bringing forward all that. We try now also, I cooperate also with UCLG, United Cities and Global Local Governments. They try to bring forward the culture goal in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I think this is also a framework which is very important. There are big institutions are mobilizing for culture, not for creative industries, in the UN context. So these are the movements we need, and they are in place. And so therefore, the more we engage, the better it can be, and that it goes up again. Into a good direction.
I think I would leave it there. Because I was thinking, you know, how do we wrap up? And indeed, I think we've touched so many different levels and so many different points. But indeed, I think, Sylvia, your last word on intermediaries and on these are the alliances and the complicities that we need, that have been fostered also in this project. But I think we now have to use them and play with them in a strategic and an intelligent way. And again, please, at the level you can, now I'm speaking also as a European, we need to pressure the European decision process, because that's now. Through intermediate organizations, through your contacts you have with MEPs and so on. But really, this is now that we have to try to make sure that the international component of cultural cooperation will find its way in the new EU programs. So thank you all. And I would like to, again, ask everybody, I think it should be everybody really that should come to the scene in order to take a last family picture. And I think we can already say bye to the people watching us in the live stream. Thanks a lot.